Mara Ellison had known the weight of silence long before the town branded her with it, long before the whispers in the dusty church doorway called her the barren widow, and long before she was pushed out of the life she built with hands that had once been steady and hopeful. The silence began the day her husband, Jonah, lowered his eyes after the midwife wiped her hands and said the words that cracked both their hearts. She may never carry a child. There were no storms that night, no dramatic thunder, only the steady hum of crickets outside their small homestead and the tightening in Jonah's jaw as he swallowed. Disappointment he tried to hide. When he died 3 years later in a tragic barn accident, the town didn't remember him for his kindness, or the way he'd carved her a spinning wheel with his own calloused hands. No, they remembered him as a man who died childless, and they blamed her for it. So when Mara walked through the streets wearing her black mourning dress, instead of sympathy, she received pitying stares, muttered judgments, and doors quietly closing as she passed. A widow without children isn't a real woman, someone whispered once, loud enough for her to hear. She didn't argue. She simply lowered her head and kept walking, carrying her grief like a sack of stones strapped to her back. When the bank claimed her home for unpaid debts she didn't even know Jonah had taken, Mara found herself with nothing but a single trunk, a handful of quilts she'd sewn, and a heart too tired to break anymore. She spent one night under the abandoned church porch before deciding she would not survive. Another day in a place that treated her like a curse. So she gathered what remained of her courage and followed the long, dirt road toward nowhere, toward anywhere that wasn't here, toward the faint rumor she'd once heard of a ranch far to the west, owned by a widowed man with 4 young children in desperate need of help. The sun bit at her shoulders, the dust clung to her boots, and her hope thinned with every step, but she walked anyway, feeling the ground pull her forward like destiny itself was tugging her sleeve. On the 3rd day of walking, when her water had run out and her voice had grown weak, she saw the ranch, an enormous stretch of land framed by distant mountains, fences zigzagging like stitched seams, and a sprawling farmhouse with smoke curling from its chimney. But what struck her first was the sound of laughter, small, free and bright children's laughter. She stood frozen at the gate, dust in her hair, trembling from exhaustion, when suddenly the screen door slammed open and 4 little figures spilled out like a burst of sunlight. A boy of about 12, tall for his age, with sharp protective eyes. A girl around 10 clutching a rag doll. A mischievous 7-year-old boy with hay stuck in his hair. And the youngest, a tiny girl with big brown eyes and a missing front tooth, who stared at Mara like she'd seen a miracle. Before Mara could speak, the youngest ran straight toward her with arms wide. "Ma!" she cried. The word hit Mara harder than hunger ever could. She didn't know whether to step back or fall to her knees. The older boy sprinted after his little sister, grabbing her arm with an embarrassed glare. "Lila, stop! You can't just call strangers." But Lila pulled free and threw her arms around Mara's leg, hugging her like she belonged to her. "You're here," Lila whispered, as if she'd been expecting her. Mara's throat tightened with a feeling so foreign. She didn't recognize it at first, someone wanting her, needing her. Even if it was a mistake, a deep voice boomed from the porch. "Kid's back inside now." Mara lifted her eyes and saw him for the first time, Caleb Hart, rancher, widower, and a man whose presence could stop a river mid-flow. Broad shoulders dusted with sweat, jaw shadowed with dark stubble, eyes the color of storm clouds about to break. He walked toward her with a cautious gait, as though he expected her to collapse or disappear. "Ma'am," he said with a respectful nod, his voice rough but not unkind. "You lost? Or do you need help?" Mara tried to answer, but exhaustion stole her voice, leaving only a weak rasp. Caleb stepped closer, noticing her cracked lips and trembling hands. "You walked here," he observed quietly. "From where?" Mara shook her head, not ready to explain the cruelty she'd escaped. The children watched her with wide eyes, curiosity in some, longing in others. Lila clung tighter to her skirt. Caleb sighed deeply. "Kids, go fetch water, and Tommy, bring a shade cloth." The children scattered, except Lila, who refused to let go. Caleb crouched beside her, his voice gentle. "Lila, sweetheart, let the lady breathe." Lila shook her head fiercely.
"She's the one," she insisted.
"Mama said someone would come." Mara froze. Caleb's eyes flickered. Not anger, not confusion, something deeper. Pain, loss, hope he refused to acknowledge. He guided Mara to sit beneath the porch shade as the children brought water. Mara drank slowly, savoring each cool drop like salvation. Caleb stood with his arms crossed, watching her with that weathered rancher stare that saw everything and said nothing. When she finally found her voice, she spoke softly. I heard you needed help on the ranch." Caleb raised a brow. "You a ranch hand?" Mara shook her head. "I can cook, sew, clean, teach children. I just need a chance." She didn't add that she needed a home or a purpose, or a place where she wasn't a burden, though her voice trembled with the weight of all those unspoken truths. Caleb exhaled slowly. "We do need help. It's been hard since—" He stopped, glancing at the children. "Since their mother died." Mara understood without being told. Lila climbed into Mara's lap as though claiming her. "Please stay," she said with innocent certainty. "We need a ma!" The words carved themselves into Mara's heart like a promise. She had no right to accept, but desperately wished she could. Caleb rubbed his jaw. "You can stay a few days. Until you're rested. We'll see after." His tone was firm, but his eyes betrayed uncertainty, not about her, but about the possibility of hope returning to a house still grieving. As they led her inside, the warmth of the farmhouse wrapped around Mara like a long-lost embrace. The children hovered around her, showing her their drawings, their books, their tiny treasures. Caleb watched quietly, arms folded, a flicker of something softening in his expression. For the first time in years, Mara felt like she wasn't a ghost walking through the world. She was seen, welcomed, needed, and somewhere deep inside her wounded heart, a fragile seed of belonging began to grow. If only, she thought, trembling as Lila held her hand, the world would allow her to stay long enough to see what it could become. And if you're enjoying stories like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because more powerful, emotional Western tales are on the way. Stories of healing, hope, revenge, romance, and redemption that you don't want to miss.